Once you sign this, there's no going back. The voice was calm, confident, too confident, and it echoed softly across the polished glass walls of the 47th floor boardroom as Ethan Caldwell held the pen just a fraction of an inch above the final page. Outside, Manhattan stretched endlessly, a grid of steel and ambition beneath a pale morning sky. But inside the room, everything felt still, like the entire city had paused to watch what he would do next. The contract lay open before him, 50 pages of legal precision, every clause reviewed, every number verified, or so it seemed. Around the table, executives in tailored suits leaned forward slightly, their eyes sharp, their smiles measured, waiting. The lead partner, a man with a silver tie and a voice that never rose above a polite murmur, gave a small nod, as if sealing the moment before it even happened. Ethan didn't rush. He never did. His fingers tightened subtly around the pen, the weight of it familiar, grounding, a symbol of decisions that built empires or quietly destroyed them. He had signed hundreds of deals like this, acquisitions, mergers, expansions that pushed Caldwell Technologies further into markets others couldn't touch. But something about this one felt off. Not enough to stop him. Not yet. Just enough to linger at the edge of his instincts like a faint whisper he couldn't quite place. Everything checks out, his legal advisor had said 10 minutes earlier. It's clean. Clean. The word repeated in his mind as he glanced down again, scanning the final paragraph, the fine print tucked neatly beneath the bold headings. The room smelled faintly of espresso and polished wood, the quiet hum of the air conditioning the only sound beneath the tension. And then, just beyond the glass doors, barely noticeable, movement. A figure passed by, pushing a cleaning cart, the soft squeak of its wheels swallowed almost instantly by the silence inside. No one paid attention. No one ever did. Except, for a brief second, Ethan's eyes flickered up. Just a glance. Just enough to register the reflection of someone who didn't belong in this world of tailored suits and million-dollar decisions. And then he looked back down at the contract. The pen lowered slightly. Mr. Caldwell, the partner said gently, shall we? The question hung in the air like a trigger waiting to be pulled. Ethan exhaled slowly, steady, controlled. He had built his life on precision, on reading what others missed, on trusting the quiet signals beneath the obvious. And yet, nothing here was loud enough to stop him. Not yet. The tip of the pen hovered over the paper, a single signature away from sealing a deal that would reshape his company's future. And in that exact moment, just as ink was about to meet paper, something shifted. Not in the room, not in the contract, but in the space just behind him, where the world of polished decisions met the unnoticed edges of reality. And that was where everything was about to change. The cart squeaked again, softer this time, as Lily Carter pushed it down the hallway with careful, practiced movements, her hands steady even though her mind was anything but. She was not supposed to be on this floor during active meetings. Everyone knew that. The executive level ran on a different set of rules, unspoken but enforced, where people like her existed only before sunrise or long after the last suit had gone home. But today had been different. A spilled cup of coffee, a last-minute request from a supervisor, a schedule shifted by 10 minutes that placed her here at exactly the wrong time, or maybe the exact right one. She slowed as she passed the glass walls of the boardroom, not looking directly inside at first, just catching fragments in the reflection, the gleam of polished shoes, the outline of a man seated at the head of the table, the faint movement of hands over paper. It should have meant nothing. It should have been just another room. Just another meeting she had no place in. But then her eyes caught something on the table. A page slightly turned. A block of text that did not align with the rest. Her steps faltered. Just for a second. Lily swallowed, her fingers tightening around the handle of the card as she leaned ever so slightly, enough to see without being seen. She had not finished college, not officially, but numbers and contracts had once been her world. Before life had taken a different path, before hospital bills and late notices replaced textbooks and exams, she had spent nights studying financial statements, memorizing terms that most people ignored. And now, standing outside a room she was not supposed to enter, those same instincts came rushing back without warning. The clause was buried deep, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. A liability transfer disguised as a routine adjustment. A shift of control that would not show itself until it was too late. Her heartbeat picked up, quick and uneven. No one inside seemed to notice. Why would they? They were looking at the big numbers, the headlines, the surface that was designed to impress. Not the small print that could quietly take everything away. Lily blinked, forcing herself to look again, to make sure she was not imagining it. But the more she read, the clearer it became. If he signed that contract, he would not just be making a deal. He would be handing over leverage, control, power, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to hold on to. Her breath caught. This was not her place. Not her responsibility. She could keep walking. She should keep walking. That was the rule. Do your job. Stay invisible. Do not interfere. Her supervisor's voice echoed in her head, sharp and clear. But then another thought pushed through, quieter but stronger. What if no one else saw it? What if this was the kind of mistake that no one realized until it was too late to fix? Lily looked down at her card, at the neatly folded cloths, the bottle of cleaner, the life she had been trying to hold together one shift at a time. Then she looked back through the glass, at the man with the pen hovering over the page, seconds away from making a decision that could change everything. Her pulse pounded in her ears. This was not her world. But somehow, in this moment, she was the only one who could see what was about to happen. And the question pressed in, louder than anything else. Do you stay silent, or do you speak? The question did not leave her. It stayed there, pressing against her chest, tightening with every second that passed as the man inside the boardroom lowered his pen closer to the paper. Lily's grip on the cart loosened, then tightened again, her fingers slightly damp as she glanced once more through the glass. No one was stopping him. No one was even hesitating. The room moved with quiet confidence, the kind that came from years of success, from deals that had always worked out before. But confidence did not mean safety. She knew that now more than ever. Her eyes dropped to the small folded paper tucked into the side pocket of her apron, something she had slipped there without thinking just moments earlier. A quick note, scribbled in haste, 3 words and a number. Clause 14. Hidden liability. The ink had smudged slightly from her fingers, but the meaning was still clear. She had written it because she needed to be sure, needed to see it outside the page, needed proof that she was not imagining things. And now that proof sat against her hip, burning like a secret she could not ignore. Her heart pounded harder. If she walked away now, nothing would change for her. She would finish her shift, clock out, take the late bus home, and wake up tomorrow to do it all over again. Safe, invisible, unnoticed. But if she stepped into that room, everything could change, and not in a way that guaranteed anything good. She could lose her job, be escorted out, labeled as someone who overstepped, someone who did not understand her place. People like her were not supposed to interrupt people like him. That was how the world worked. She knew that. Everyone knew that. And yet, she looked again. The pen was almost touching the page now. Just a fraction of an inch. One motion. One signature. That was all it would take. Lily inhaled slowly, her chest rising as she made a decision that did not feel logical, or safe, or even entirely hers. It felt like something deeper, something that refused to stay quiet even when everything else told her to. She reached for the cart, pushing it forward, the wheels rolling faster now as she moved toward the door. Each step felt louder than it should have, echoing in her ears even though the hallway remained silent. The glass doors loomed in front of her, tall and polished, reflecting a version of herself that did not belong on the other side. For a brief second, she hesitated. This was the line, the invisible boundary she had never crossed. Once she stepped through, there would be no pretending it had not happened. No going back to being unseen. Her hand hovered near the handle. Inside, the man at the head of the table shifted slightly, his pen finally dipping low enough that the tip almost brushed the paper. Time seemed to narrow into that single moment. Lily's pulse surged. And then, before she could talk herself out of it, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The door did not slam. It did not creak. It opened with a soft, controlled motion that somehow felt louder than any noise Lily had ever heard as every conversation inside the room stopped at once. Heads turned. Not all at once, but one by one, like a ripple moving across still water, until every pair of eyes in the room landed on her. For a split second, no one spoke. The contrast was immediate and undeniable. Tailored suits, polished shoes, silk ties, and then her. A cleaning cart just behind her shoulder. A uniform that did not belong in this room. A presence that was never meant to interrupt. Lily felt it all at once, the weight of their attention, the silent question hanging in the air. Why is she here? Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to take another step forward, her shoes barely making a sound against the floor. Somewhere to her left, a man shifted in his chair, irritation flashing across his face as he leaned toward another executive. "This floor is restricted," he muttered under his breath, though not quietly enough. Another voice followed, sharper. Security should have caught this. The words pressed in, but Lily did not look at them. She could not. If she did, she would stop. If she stopped, this moment would collapse, and everything she had seen would disappear into silence. So instead, she kept her eyes fixed on the man at the head of the table. Ethan Caldwell. Even before she knew his name, she recognized the way the room moved around him, the subtle shifts in posture, the careful pauses in speech. He was the center of gravity here. And right now, his pen was still hovering just above the contract. He had not signed yet. Not yet. That was all that mattered. Lily took another step closer, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure someone could hear it. The distance between them felt longer than it should have, stretched thin by tension and expectation. "Miss," someone said, louder this time, the tone firm, controlled. "You need to leave immediately." She heard it. She understood it. But she did not stop. Because the moment was slipping. Because the pen was still there. Because if she waited even one more second, it would be too late. She reached the table. Close enough now to see the contract clearly, the lines of text she had memorized in those few stolen seconds outside. Close enough to see his hand, steady, unmoving, as if he was waiting for something he could not yet name. Lily leaned in slightly, just enough to lower her voice, just enough to keep her words from becoming part of the room. Her hands trembled, but her voice, when it came, was quiet, controlled, certain. "Clause 14, she whispered, her eyes flicking briefly to the page before returning to him. "Hidden liability transfer. If you sign, you lose control in under 90 days. The words were simple, direct. No hesitation left in them now. Around them, the room seemed to hold its breath. Ethan did not move immediately. He did not look at the others. He did not react the way anyone expected. Instead, his gaze shifted, slowly, deliberately, from the contract to her. And in that silence, something changed. For a moment, Ethan Caldwell said nothing, and that silence was louder than any reaction the room had been prepared for. His eyes stayed on Lily, not dismissive, not confused, but focused in a way that made the air shift, subtle but undeniable, like pressure changing before a storm. The pen remained in his hand, still hovering just above the page, but now it was no longer moving forward. It had stopped. Completely. Around the table, discomfort began to ripple outward. One of the executives cleared his throat. Another shifted in his seat. The man in the silver tie leaned forward slightly, his polite expression tightening at the edges. "Mr. Caldwell," he said carefully, his voice still smooth but now carrying a trace of urgency. "We have already reviewed every clause in detail. This agreement has been vetted by both legal teams." Ethan did not respond. Not yet. Instead, his gaze dropped slowly back to the contract, his eyes scanning the page again, but this time with a different kind of attention. Not the broad overview of a seasoned executive. This was sharper, slower, intentional. He turned the page back, just slightly, his fingers adjusting the paper until his eyes landed exactly where Lily had indicated. Clause 14. The words sat there, quiet, unassuming, buried beneath. Layers of formal language designed to look harmless. But now that he was looking for it, it was no longer invisible. His jaw tightened, just enough to be noticed if someone was watching closely. And someone was. The room felt it before anyone understood it. Something was wrong. "This is standard language," another voice added quickly, trying to regain control of the moment. "It is part of the restructuring framework. Nothing unusual." Ethan's eyes did not lift. "Standard," he repeated, his tone even, almost too calm. Then, without warning, he lowered the pen and set it down. Not on the signature line. Beside it. The soft click of metal against the table echoed across the room like a decision being made in real time. A shift. Immediate. Final. The man in the silver tie blinked, the first crack in his composed demeanor. "Is there a concern?" he asked, though the answer was already forming in the silence. Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair, his hand now resting flat on the table, no longer holding the instrument that would have sealed the deal. His eyes moved from the contract to the faces around him, one by one, measured, deliberate. "There is," he said. The words were simple, but they landed with weight. No raised voice, no accusation, just certainty. Across the table, tension sharpened. A few executives exchanged quick glances. Someone reached for their tablet, as if data might fix what instinct had already exposed. Ethan's gaze returned briefly to Lily, standing beside him, still, uncertain, as if bracing for what came next. For a fraction of a second, something unreadable passed through his expression. Not gratitude. Not yet. But recognition. Then he turned back to the room. "I would like legal to walk me through Clause 14, he said, his voice steady, controlled. In detail. The shift was complete now. The room that had been waiting for a signature was now under scrutiny. And for the first time since Lily had stepped inside, she realized something else. He had listened, not because of who she was, but because of what she saw. And that changed everything. No one spoke at first, and that silence began to stretch, thin and sharp, as the legal advisor slowly adjusted his glasses and reached for the contract with hands that were just slightly less steady than before. He cleared his throat, buying time, flipping through the pages with deliberate care, as if the answer might rearrange itself if he moved slowly enough. "Clause 14, he repeated, his voice measured, but there was a subtle shift now, a hesitation that had not been there earlier. Ethan watched him without blinking, his posture relaxed but his attention absolute, the kind of stillness that made every other movement in the room feel unnecessary. "Yes," Ethan said quietly, not as a prompt, but as a reminder that the moment was not going to pass on its own. The advisor nodded, scanning the text, his finger tracing the lines as he began to speak. "This clause outlines a contingency structure in the event of underperformance in the first 90 days. It allows for a temporary adjustment in operational oversight to ensure stability during the transition period." The explanation sounded clean, professional, almost reassuring. But something in the phrasing did not sit right anymore. Not after what had just been pointed out. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing just enough to signal that he was no longer listening to the surface. "Temporary," he repeated, his tone calm but precise. "Define temporary." The advisor paused, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Across the table, the man in the silver tie shifted again, this time more noticeably, his fingers tapping once against the edge of his folder before he forced them still. "It is a standard protective measure," he interjected smoothly, stepping in before the answer could fully form. "It ensures that both parties are safeguarded during the integration phase." Ethan did not look at him. Not yet. His attention remained fixed on the advisor. "Define temporary," he said again, the words identical, but heavier this time, leaving no room to redirect. The advisor swallowed, his eyes dropping back to the page. 90 days, he said finally, with an option to extend under certain performance metrics. Ethan's gaze sharpened. "And who controls those metrics?" Another pause. Longer this time. The room felt it. The shift from explanation to exposure. "They are jointly reviewed," the advisor said, but the confidence had thinned, the edges no longer as clean as before. Ethan's hand moved slightly on the table, his fingers tapping once, a quiet, controlled motion that seemed to echo louder than it should have. Then, slowly, he turned his head, not to the advisor, but to the man in the silver tie. Their eyes met, and for the first time, the polished calm on the other man's face cracked just enough to reveal something underneath. Not fear. Not fully, but awareness. He knew. Ethan leaned back again, his voice still level, still controlled, but now carrying a clarity that cut through the room. "So let me make sure I understand this correctly," he said. "If I sign this agreement, your firm gains operational oversight within 90 days based on performance metrics that you help define and can extend that control if those same metrics are not met." No one answered. They did not need to. The truth had already settled into the space between them. Ethan's eyes flicked briefly to the contract, then back to the man across from him. "That is not a partnership," he said quietly. "That is a transfer of control." The words landed, final and unmistakable. Around the table, The tension broke into motion. Papers shifted. Someone inhaled sharply. The illusion that had held the room together moments ago was gone, replaced by something far less comfortable. And beside him, Lily stood completely still, realizing that the thing she had seen, the thing she had almost ignored, had just changed the direction of everything in the room. The room did not recover. Not immediately. The polished rhythm that had guided the meeting just minutes ago was gone, replaced by something slower, heavier, as if every person present was recalculating their position in real time. The man in the silver tie leaned back slightly, his fingers now steepled in front of him, the faintest trace of a smile returning, but it no longer carried the same confidence. It was thinner now, more deliberate. "Mr. Caldwell," he began, his tone measured, almost conversational. "You are interpreting the clause in a way that exaggerates its intent. These provisions are designed to protect both parties, not to undermine your authority." Ethan did not interrupt. He let the words finish, let them settle, before responding. That was his way, always had been. He did not rush conclusions. He let people reveal themselves fully. "Then it should be easy to remove," Ethan said calmly. The sentence was simple, almost casual, but it landed with precision. Across the table, a few heads turned again, this time not toward Lily, but toward the man in the silver tie. The shift in attention was unmistakable. The pressure had moved. The man paused, just briefly, before answering. "It is not standard practice to alter a finalized agreement at this stage," he replied, his voice still controlled, but now carrying a subtle firmness that had not been there before. "Our terms have been clearly outlined from the beginning." Ethan's gaze held steady. "So has mine," he said. No raise in volume. No change in tone. Just a line drawn, clean and unmistakable. The silence that followed was no longer uncertain. It was defined. Somewhere to the right, one of Ethan's executives leaned forward, his earlier confidence replaced by alert focus as he began scrolling through the contract on his tablet again, faster this time, searching, confirming. Another executive whispered quietly to legal, their voices low but urgent. The room was no longer aligned. It was divided. And at the center of that divide stood a decision that had not yet been made. The man in the silver tie exhaled slowly, his posture shifting just enough to signal that the dynamic had changed. "If there are concerns," he said, choosing his words carefully now, "we can revisit certain elements in a follow-up discussion. There is no need to derail the entire agreement over a misinterpretation." Ethan's eyes did not leave his. "There is every reason," he replied. The weight of the statement settled in immediately. Not defensive, not reactive. Final. He reached forward, not for the pen, but for the contract itself, closing it with a deliberate motion that echoed across the table. The sound was soft, but it carried. "We are done here," Ethan said. The words were not loud, but they did not need to be. Around the table, movement followed. Chairs shifted. Papers were gathered. But no one stood right away. There was a pause, a moment where the reality of what had just happened needed to be fully understood. A deal of this size did not simply stop. Not like this. Not because of a single interruption. And yet it had. The man in the silver tie held Ethan's gaze for 1 second longer, then nodded once, slow, controlled, as if acknowledging a move in a game that had just changed direction. "Very well," he said quietly. Then he stood. Others followed. The meeting dissolved, not in chaos, but in something far more telling. Controlled retreat. And as the room began to clear, as conversations shifted into hushed tones and careful exits, one thing remained unchanged. Lily was still standing beside the table, exactly where she had been when she spoke. Only now, every glance that passed her carried something different. Not irritation, not dismissal, but recognition. And for the first time since she had stepped inside, she realized she was no longer invisible. The last of the executives filed out with controlled composure, their voices lowered into tight, professional murmurs that barely masked the shift that had just taken place. And as the glass doors closed behind them, the boardroom felt different, quieter, stripped of its earlier certainty, leaving behind only the echo of what had almost happened and the presence of two people who had not yet moved. Lily stood exactly where she had been, her hands still at her sides, her breath shallow now that the adrenaline had nowhere to go, the weight of what she had done settling in all at once, heavier than the moment itself. The cart was still near the door, slightly out of place, like a reminder of where she belonged and where she had stepped out of line. She could feel it again, that instinct to retreat, to apologize, to explain that she had not meant to interrupt something so important, something so far above her world. But before she could take even a single step back, Ethan Caldwell spoke. "Stay." The word was quiet, but it stopped her completely. She froze, her eyes lifting to him, unsure if she had heard correctly. He was already standing now, the contract still closed on the table in front of him, his posture relaxed but his attention unmistakably focused on her. For a brief second, neither of them said anything, and in that silence, Lily became acutely aware of everything. The faint hum of the city beyond the glass, the soft ticking of the clock on the wall, the way her heart had not yet slowed down. Ethan walked around the table, not hurried, not dramatic, just steady, each step measured as he closed the distance between them. Up close, he looked exactly like the kind of man who made decisions that changed entire industries, composed, controlled, used to being the one who saw everything first. And yet, a few minutes ago, he had almost missed something that would have cost him everything. He stopped a few feet away from her, close enough now that the difference between them felt less like distance and more like contrast. "What is your name?" he asked. No accusation, no edge, just a direct question. Lily hesitated for half a second, her voice catching before she found it. "Lily," she said quietly. "Lily Carter." He nodded once, as if committing it to memory. "Lily," he repeated, not as a test, but as acknowledgement. His eyes held hers for a moment longer, searching, not for credentials, not for status, but for something else entirely. "How did you see that?" The question was simple, but it carried weight. Lily swallowed, her fingers curling slightly as she tried to steady herself. "I used to study finance," she said, the words coming out slower now, more careful. "I did not finish, but I remember how these contracts work, where things get hidden." She glanced briefly at the table, then back at him. It did not look right. Ethan listened without interrupting, his expression unchanged, but something in his gaze shifted again, deeper this time, as if he was recalibrating not just the situation, but her place within it. For a moment, the room was still again, but not in the same way as before. This was not tension. This was evaluation. And then, without looking away, he asked the question that Lily had not been prepared for. "Why did you say something?" It was not doubt. It was curiosity. Real, unfiltered curiosity. Lily hesitated again, the answer not complicated, but somehow harder to say out loud. "Because no one else did," she said finally. The words hung there, simple and unpolished, but completely true. And in that moment, something settled between them, something that had nothing to do with titles or positions or the world outside that room, but everything to do with what had just happened inside it. The answer lingered in the air longer than either of them expected, simple words carrying a weight that did not need explanation. And for a moment Ethan did not respond, not because he did not understand, but because he did, completely, and that made it harder to dismiss. He studied her again, more carefully this time, not as someone who had interrupted a meeting, but as someone who had changed the outcome of it. "No one else did," he repeated quietly, almost to himself, as if testing the truth of it against everything he had just seen. Behind them, the boardroom door opened briefly and one of his senior executives stepped halfway inside, hesitating when he realized the conversation had not ended. "Mr. Caldwell," he said cautiously, "legal is waiting to discuss next steps." Ethan did not turn immediately. His attention remained on Lily for 1 second longer, as if deciding something that had not yet been spoken. Then he nodded once, not to dismiss her, but as if marking a point in time. "Give me 5 minutes," he said without looking back. The door closed again, and the room returned to its quiet. Ethan exhaled slowly, then walked past her toward the table, his hand brushing lightly against the closed contract before he picked it up. He did not open it. Not yet. Instead, he held it in one hand, thoughtful, as if the document now meant something entirely different than it had 10 minutes ago. "You understand what would have happened if I signed this," he said, turning slightly back toward her. It was not a question. Lily nodded, her voice softer now, but steady. "Yes," she said. "They would not take everything right away. It would look normal at first. Then small changes. Then control." She hesitated, then added, "By the time it became obvious, it would already be done." Ethan watched her closely as she spoke, noting not just what she said, but how she said it. No exaggeration, no attempt to impress, just clarity. That mattered more than anything else in that moment. He gave a small nod, confirming what he already knew. That is exactly how it works, he said. He placed the contract back down on the table, but not where it had been before. This time, it was set aside, deliberately, as if it no longer belonged at the center of anything. The shift was subtle, but it carried meaning. He stepped closer again, not imposing, but direct. You said you studied finance, he continued. Why did you stop? The question caught Lily off guard, not because it was difficult, but because no one in this building had ever asked her anything like that before. She hesitated, her eyes dropping briefly before she answered. My mom got sick, she said. I had to work. Tuition was not possible anymore. The words were simple, but the story behind them was not. Ethan listened without interruption, his expression unchanged, but his focus sharper now, as if each detail was being placed into a larger picture. And you never went back, he said. Lily shook her head slightly. No. Another quiet moment passed, but this one felt different, less uncertain, more defined. Ethan glanced once more at the contract, then back at her, and when he spoke again, his tone had shifted, not softer, not warmer, but more intentional. You saw something an entire room of experienced executives did not, he said. That is not an accident. Lily did not know how to respond to that, so she did not try. She simply stood there, unsure of what came next, only certain that whatever it was, it would not be the same as what she had expected when she walked into work that morning. And for Ethan, standing in a room that had nearly cost him everything, the realization settled in quietly but firmly. The most important insight in the room had not come from power or position or experience. It had come from the one person no one had been looking at. The realization did not need to be spoken out loud, but it shifted the space between them all the same, turning what had been an interruption into something far more significant. And Ethan let that silence sit for a moment longer before he moved again, this time with purpose. He reached for the pen that had nearly sealed the deal, lifting it slowly between his fingers, studying it as if it now carried a different meaning than it had just minutes ago. Then, without hesitation, he placed it on top of the closed contract and slid both slightly to the edge of the table, away from the center, away from decision. This should not have been missed, he said, not looking at Lily, but not addressing anyone else either, his voice low and controlled, carrying more weight than any raised tone could have. It was not blame. It was acknowledgement, and it was enough. The boardroom door opened again, this time more quickly, and two members of his legal team stepped in, their expressions focused but uncertain, clearly aware that something had changed. Mr. Caldwell, one of them began, tablet in hand. We have reviewed the clause again, and there are concerns regarding how the control provisions are structured. Ethan gave a slight nod, as if the confirmation was expected. There are more than concerns, he replied. There is intent. The words were precise, deliberate, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The legal team exchanged a brief glance, then stepped further into the room, already adjusting their approach, their tone, their assumptions. The dynamic had shifted completely now. Ethan turned slightly toward them, but his next words were not directed at the contract. I want a full internal review, he said. Every communication, every draft, every revision that led to this version. His voice did not rise, but it carried authority in a way that made the request sound less like a question and more like a certainty. Focus on where this language originated and who approved it at each stage. The attorneys nodded immediately, already moving to act. Understood, one of them said. We will start with the negotiation trail and internal approvals. Ethan's gaze sharpened just slightly. Start with the approvals, he corrected. If something like this made it into the final draft, it was not an accident. The implications settled into the room, quiet but unmistakable. This was not just an external problem. It might be internal, and that changed everything. Lily stood still as the conversation unfolded, the scale of what she had stepped into becoming clearer with every word, but she remained silent, unsure if she should stay or leave, if her part in this moment had already ended or if it had only just begun. Ethan turned back toward her then, not abruptly, but with the same steady focus he had carried throughout the entire exchange. For a second, He said nothing, as if considering how to bridge the space between her world and his. Then he spoke. "Do not leave the building," he said. The words were calm, but they carried direction, not suggestion. Lily blinked, surprised. She started, unsure how to respond. He did not interrupt, but he did not step back either. "I am not finished with this," he added, his tone unchanged. Then, after the smallest pause, "And I am not finished with you." It was not a threat. It was not even pressure. It was something else entirely. Recognition turning into intention. And as the legal team moved quickly around the room, gathering documents, making calls, setting things in motion that would reach far beyond this floor, Lily realized that the moment she thought had already changed everything was only the beginning. The room did not slow down after that. If anything, it accelerated, conversations splitting into sharp, efficient fragments as the legal team moved quickly, pulling up documents, cross-checking timelines, calling for additional files that had suddenly become critical. The quiet, polished atmosphere from earlier was gone, replaced by focused urgency that carried a different kind of energy, one that did not rely on appearances but on uncovering what had been hidden. Lily remained where she was for a few seconds longer, unsure of where to stand, unsure of what role she now played in a room that had never been meant for her in the first place. Then, slowly, she stepped back, instinct guiding her toward the edges again, toward the space where she was more comfortable, less visible. But this time, the room did not let her disappear so easily. One of the attorneys glanced in her direction, not dismissively, but with curiosity, as if trying to understand how she fit into something that had just unraveled. Another executive paused briefly near the door, his gaze lingering for a moment longer than it should have before he left. It was subtle, but it was there. The shift in how they saw her. Ethan noticed it too. He always noticed shifts like that. He did not comment on it, but his awareness sharpened, tracking not just the situation, but the people within it. He moved toward the far end of the table where one of his senior analysts had joined the legal team, reviewing early drafts of the contract on a tablet. "Show me the revision history," Ethan said, his tone direct, cutting through the overlapping conversations without needing to raise his voice. The analyst nodded quickly, pulling up a sequence of edits, each time-stamped, each tied to a different stage of negotiation. "This version," the analyst said, pointing to the screen, "the clause was not present here. It appears in a later revision, after internal review." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Who signed off on that revision?" he asked. The analyst hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. "It was approved through the Finance Oversight Channel," he said. "Final authorization came from the Office of the Chief Financial Officer." The words settled heavily, not dramatic, not loud, but significant in a way that did not need emphasis. Ethan did not react outwardly. He did not need to. The implication was already clear. This was not just an external attempt to gain control. It had been allowed in. Quietly. Internally. He exhaled slowly, then straightened, his posture shifting back into something more defined, more decisive. "Give me everything tied to that approval," he said. "Emails, sign-offs, internal notes. I want a full chain." The analyst nodded immediately. "Yes, sir." Across the room, Lily watched all of this unfold, the scale of it expanding beyond anything she had imagined when she first noticed that single clause on a page. This was no longer just about a contract. It was about trust, about decisions made behind closed doors, about how easily something important could be altered without anyone noticing. She felt it again, that instinct to step back completely, to leave before someone asked her to, before she crossed another line she did not fully understand. But before she could move further, Ethan's voice reached her again, not loud, but precise. "Lily." She looked up immediately. He was already walking toward her, his expression unchanged, but his focus clear. "You said you recognized the structure," he continued. "I want you to walk me through exactly what you saw." The request was direct, but what made it different was not the words. It was the assumption behind them. That she could. That she should. Lily hesitated, just for a second, the weight of the room pressing in again. Then she nodded, because for the first time since she had stepped inside, she was no longer being told to leave. She was being asked to stay for a reason. For a moment, Lily did not move, not because she did not understand the request, but because she did, and that made it heavier than anything she had done so far. The room had shifted again, but this time the attention was not just on what had gone wrong, it was on her. Not as an interruption, not as a mistake, but as someone expected to explain something that everyone else had missed. She took a slow breath, steadying herself, then stepped forward toward the table, her eyes briefly scanning the contract again, as if confirming what she had already seen. "It is the structure," she began, her voice quiet at first, but clear. "The clause is not written to stand out. It is designed to blend into the language around it." She reached out carefully, not touching the paper at first, just indicating the section. Most people read the headline terms: ownership, percentages, revenue projections. But this part, she paused, then gently pointed to the line. This part shifts operational authority without making it obvious. The legal team leaned in slightly, their earlier confidence replaced by focused attention. Ethan stood beside her, silent, watching not just the contract, but her process, the way she broke it down, the way she saw through it. "The wording makes it sound temporary," Lily continued. "But the trigger is performance-based. That means it depends on how success is defined." She looked up briefly, meeting Ethan's eyes, then back at the page. "If the other party influences those metrics, even indirectly, they can control whether the clause activates and whether it stays active." One of the attorneys nodded slowly, already recognizing the implication. "And once activated," Lily added, "the language allows for extended oversight. It does not say permanent, but it does not clearly limit it either." The room was completely still now, every word settling in, connecting pieces that had been overlooked before. Ethan's gaze remained steady, his expression unchanged, but there was something else there now, something closer to certainty than suspicion. "So control shifts quietly," he said, not as a question, but as confirmation. Lily nodded. "Yes," she said, "not all at once. That is why it is hard to catch. It looks like protection, but it works like leverage." The distinction was simple, but it reframed everything. Across the table, the analyst who had been reviewing the revision history looked up. "That aligns with the changes introduced in the later draft," he said. The clause was added after internal approval, but the framing made it seem routine. Ethan absorbed that without reacting outwardly, then turned his attention fully back to Lily. "You saw that in seconds," he said. "It was not praise. It was fact." Lily hesitated slightly, unsure how to respond. "I have seen similar structures before," she said. "Not exactly like this, but close enough." Ethan studied her for another moment, then gave a small nod, as if a decision had just been confirmed internally. He turned back toward the legal team. "Document everything she just said," he instructed. "I want it included in the internal review." The attorneys nodded immediately, already making notes, treating her explanation not as an observation, but as a key part of the investigation. Lily noticed it then, the shift that mattered more than anything else. No one questioned why she was speaking. No one told her to step back. They were listening, fully, and for the first time in a long time, what she knew mattered. The room remained still for a moment after Lily finished speaking, not because there was nothing left to say, but because everything that needed to be understood had already landed, and for the first time since the meeting began, the direction was clear. Ethan did not rush to fill the silence. He let it settle, let the weight of the truth reshape the space, then slowly reached for the contract again, not with urgency, but with intention. He opened it just enough to look at the page one last time, his eyes moving directly to the clause that had almost changed everything. Then, without hesitation, he closed it again, firmer this time, and turned it over, placing it face down on the table as if sealing its fate. "This deal is off," he said. No announcement, no negotiation, just a decision. The legal team did not question it. They were already moving, already documenting, already preparing for what would come next. Across the room, the analyst continued pulling records, the quiet tapping of keys now the only sound breaking the silence. The machine had shifted direction completely. Ethan turned back to Lily, and this time there was no distance left in his focus, no separation between where she stood and where decisions were made. "You changed the outcome of this room," he said, his voice calm, but direct. Lily blinked slightly, the words settling in slower than everything else that had happened. "I just said what I saw," she replied, almost automatically. Ethan gave a small nod. "That is exactly why it mattered," he said. He stepped closer, not imposing, but certain, the kind of certainty that did not need to be explained. Most people in this building see what they expect to see, he continued. You saw what was actually there. The distinction was simple, but it carried weight. Lily did not respond right away. She did not know how to. Because for the first time, what she had always treated as something small, something practical, something that helped her get through things quietly, was being recognized as something more. Ethan glanced briefly toward the legal team, confirming they were moving forward, then returned his attention to her. You said you never went back, he said, referring to her studies. Lily nodded once. I did not have the chance, she answered. Ethan studied her for a moment longer, then made a decision that, to him, felt just as clear as the one he had made about the contract. You do now, he said. The words were steady, leaving no room for confusion. Lily frowned slightly, not understanding at first. I do not, she began, but he did not interrupt. You are not going back to cleaning floors tomorrow, he said. You are coming upstairs. The statement hung there, direct and undeniable. We will figure out what you need. Training. Education. A role that actually uses what you can do. Lily stared at him, the meaning of his words unfolding slowly, almost unreal in the context of everything that had happened. Why? She asked before she could stop herself. It was not doubt. It was disbelief. Ethan's expression did not change, but his answer came without hesitation. Because you earned it, he said. No embellishment. No explanation beyond that. Just a truth that stood on its own. The room around them continued to move, the investigation already in motion, decisions branching outward beyond what either of them could fully see yet. But in that moment, something else had been decided as well. Not by chance, not by status, but by action. And as Lily stood there, no longer at the edge of the room, no longer invisible, she realized that the line she had crossed when she opened that door was not a mistake. It was the beginning of something she had never been given the chance to step into before.